Our Mike Seidel, who's in Vero Beach. Mike, another thing that is going to be playing out here is regardless of exactly where Nicole's center goes and how strong it is, there's going to be this huge gradient between Nicole, the low pressure, and high pressure coming off the East Coast. There's no avoiding a strong onshore flow out of this one.
Yes, Dr. Nab, and I calculated we're still 600 miles almost due west of the center of subtropical storm Nicole, and already the winds east-northeast sustained 15 to 20 miles an hour, and we've got another 2.5 to 3 days of onshore flow, at least 2.5 days. I want to show you, we don't have a lot of beach left at this point. We're about an hour and a half, almost 2 hours from high tide, so we've got this much beach. But look at how much beach erosion we've had. These dunes have been eaten away at, and then we have a little bit of the beach, and then we have another kind of a berm here, so we've got kind of a double dip here, and there's the surf, the Atlantic, now running 6 to 8 feet. We have the surf issues, the battering surf, the rip currents are going to be up through Wednesday, so very dangerous swimming conditions. You can go into your feet or your ankles okay. Water's still pretty nice November. Water temp right now about 80 degrees. We have the hurricane watch up for a good part of the east coast of Florida, the storm surge watch. Right now, Hurricane Center is estimating the surge here to be running 3 to 5 feet. Now you got to figure out the high tides. Well, the high tides are running early evening and early morning, again tomorrow morning about 7:30. Then I looked ahead to Wednesday night and Thursday morning when the center of whatever we have comes on shore, likely just south of here, and we have a low tide at 2:18 a.m. So that kind of coordinates with the center coming on shore, the low tide. So that, Dr. Nab, could save us a couple of feet, because with this full moon the next couple of days, tides are running already about 2 feet above where they typically are. So a lot to go into this, but again, unrelenting onshore flow, battering waves, beach erosion, and eventually we'll have some coastal flooding and overwash.
All right, thanks, Mike. We'll get back to Mike here in just a little bit.
So our Mike Seidel, who's live in Vero Beach, Florida, under hurricane watch. You're under storm surge watch, and let's hope that the damage that Ian did doesn't make us more vulnerable on the east coast of Florida.
Yeah, let's hope so. It's all about the tides, and the tides are impacted by the moon. Here's the surf already up, but I want to show you the surf, and then we'll go up to the full moon. Tonight is the night, the last total eclipse in this part of the world for 3 years. It goes into the shadow at 3:02, and then it's total from 4:07, I believe, 4:09 to 5:17 a.m. So about an hour and 15 minutes early tomorrow morning. So there's your full moon, and if you get a chance, get up and enjoy it. But it's impacting the tides, because when we have a full moon and new moon, especially a full moon, that increases the range. Typically, the tide cycle in between those moons about 2 feet. But on Tuesday, tonight through Tuesday into Wednesday, that tidal range goes up to about 4 feet. So that's double the tidal range. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the low tide on Thursday morning is about 2:15 in the morning, and that's going to correspond roughly, based on the current forecast, of when we have the center of Nicole coming on shore. So that may save us a couple of feet. We'll see how that turns out. In the meantime, continuing coverage with subtropical storm Nicole next.
Our Mike Seidel, who's live in Vero Beach. Vero Beach, one of those spots that could end up getting the full brunt of potentially a landfalling hurricane and could have bona fide storm surge in some parts of the east coast of Florida, Mike.
Yeah, certainly, and they're worried about that because this beach, as we've been showing you, is fairly narrow to start with, and there's been significant damage to the dune. In fact, there's not much dune between here and the property, but there is a fair amount of elevation. So I'm not overly concerned about the surge, even at 4 or 5 feet. If it hits at high tide, right now we're expecting the worst of it to hit, hopefully during that low tide cycle around 2 a.m. Thursday morning. Not really concerned about water getting over the dune and into any kind of properties. We'll see how that, if changes any in the next couple of days. I want to show you the surf right now. Boy, it is ramped up. We've got these northeast winds sustained at about 18 to 20 miles an hour. And the other thing we're watching is the moon. The full moon tonight, the total lunar eclipse coming up. Starting a little after 3 a.m. Eastern, it'll be total from about 4:10 to about 5:20. but that's going to affect the tides and increase the tidal range by about a factor of 2, from 2 feet to about 4 feet. So we're working, that's to our disadvantage on how high the water gets. But the bottom line, you take 3 days of this and the pounding, unrelenting, battering waves of upwards of 8 to 9 feet as we get into tomorrow and Wednesday. We're going to lose more sand, beach erosion. We'll probably have some major coastal flooding in some of these low-lying areas. And it remains to be seen if the local jurisdictions, these counties like here in Indian River County, if they issue any mandatory evacuations. The other thing, we'll have some rainfall. It's interesting because I looked at Vero Beach. They've had about 38 inches of rainfall. They're down about 11. Meanwhile, not far away in Orlando, they've had nearly 57 inches of rainfall, and they're way up. They got that rain from Ian, so there's a big disparity. But the Florida Peninsula is not in any type of drought at this point. So it's not one of these situations because most of the country is in a drought situation, Chris. So watching and waiting, we've got a long wait ahead, and this is going to be the battering waves and the unrelenting wind sustained now 20, which will slowly ramp up, especially Wednesday night into Thursday morning. Once the storm comes in, we'll get a southwest wind, and that'll take care of the surge and coastal flooding issues. Chris?
All right, thank you very much, Mike Seidel, and a lot more live reports to come from Florida.
And Mike Seidel, who's in Vero Beach, even if you don't get hurricane conditions in Vero Beach, you're likely to get tropical storm conditions and a long period of time of onshore flow that's going to pound the beaches.
Yes, Dr. Dabman, we've had that onshore flow since yesterday, and today the winds have been blowing steadily at 20 miles an hour. I just checked the buoy east of Cape Canaveral, and they've got 9.8 footers. Now, the surf behind me is running about 6 to 7 footers. It's breaking way out. The period is about 7 seconds. That's the time between each wave crest. And you can see the surf here illuminated by our lights. And also, I looked at full moon up there. Isn't that beautiful? And we've got the final lunar eclipse of the year, and the last one we're going to see in this part of the world for, I think it's 3 years. Totality about 4:10 to 5:20 tomorrow morning. If you get a chance, I know I'm going to set my alarm, get up and take some pictures, and then get a little bit more shut-eye. But that moon is influencing the tides. When you have a full moon or new moon, every couple of weeks you have higher than average tides. In this case, looking at the tidal variations, the tide is going to be running about 2 feet higher at time of high tide than it typically would be during the mid-cycle. So what's important is when is low tide and when is high tide. Well, 2:18 Thursday morning is low tide. That's roughly when we think Nicole will make landfall, but that could change. We'll sort it all out for you and have more in the days to come. More on Nicole's impact next.
And our Mike Seidel is live in Vero Beach, Florida, squarely within the hurricane watch and the storm surge watch, and one of the many communities from where you're standing, Mike, north into North Carolina. They're going to have days of really potent onshore flow.
Yes, Dr. Dodd, this is not your typical storm, as you've mentioned. We've talked about this for a couple of days. It's a very broad area of gradient wind, and yes, it may tighten up a little bit, but typical system, you have strong winds, the strongest winds with the eye wall, and then they weaken as you go out. But this is a very broad system. It's much like a nor'easter. So the winds far away from the center, and as Dr. Nab mentioned, up into the Carolinas. And that's synonymous with this onshore flow for several days, which will just literally pile the water up. We've got that northeast wind. It's been running steadily at 15 to 20 miles an hour all day. It's kind of a gradient wind. It's not very gusty between the low and the high, the pressure gradient. That's why we have the wind. I want to show you the surf. That's what's happened. To get waves, you have the wind energy transferred down to the ocean surface, and these waves coming right up here. We just had high tide about 20 minutes ago, and this is about as high as it got, but we're only about, I'm looking about 15 to 20 feet from the dune line. In fact, I want to show you how badly damaged the dunes are here in this part of Vero Beach downtown. And look at that. Like 3 feet of sand, a 3-foot dune or higher is gone. from previous storms and high tides. So there's not much to eat away. And, you know, the dune is very important for protecting the beach and the oceanfront property. Of course, we've gone in and built up in many of these areas, but it goes to show you how much sand is lost. Many times the beach will replenish itself after a storm, and hopefully we'll get some more sand back in here in the next few months. It's a nice day today on the beach, 85, but the wind cutting down on the edge with the heat and humidity. So the surf, 6 to 7 footers, they'll be ramping up. And as Dr. Nab mentioned, we have the storm surge watch. That'll likely go to a warning. And we have the hurricane watch. So a lot to contend with. And Chris, no doubt these beaches will be further damaged over the next couple of days as Nicole approaches and makes landfall sometime early Thursday morning, more than likely south of here. So we get this continued onshore flow until the storm goes by on Thursday morning.
All right, meteorologist Mike Seidel there in Vero.
And one of those areas that could possibly get some bona fide storm surge, maybe even hurricane conditions, is Vero Beach, where we have our Mike Seidel live. And either way, Mike, there's no avoiding the onshore flow that's going to continue to pound the beaches and cause more and more erosion.
Yes, and that's the different kind of animal we have with this storm, because with a hurricane, you don't get 3 or 4, a typical hurricane or tropical storm, you don't get 3 or 4 days of onshore flow. But this fetch coming way, hundreds of miles across the Atlantic onto the East Coast. You can see the surf right now up around 5, 6, 7 footers. Will get even higher. And the full moon is going to push those tides even higher, about 2 feet higher than average. So we got that working against us. But with that said, we're going to keep an eye on that surge. We have a 3 to 5 foot expected storm surge. We'll see how that works out based on the low tide and when it comes in. The low tide on Thursday morning at 2:18 a.m. So hopefully they come at the same time. But we've had some tourists come up. Just talked to a nice couple from Michigan. They're down here for another week and a half, and they're concerned because they're on the lowest level of where they're staying in the condo. I assured them that I'm not overly concerned about water getting that far up, because there is, even though the dune is primarily gone in many areas, there's still elevation, and there's more elevation into the property. So we will keep our fingers crossed and hope for the best with this particular system. By no means is this an Ian with surge values of 12, 15, 18 feet forecast. 3 to 5 feet is the highest forecast at this time. So a lot to watch over the next couple of days as the wind ramps up, the surf ramps up, and we follow Nicole. We'll see if it becomes a fully tropical storm and maybe even a hurricane. Stay with us.
One of the places that's in the cone under hurricane watch, storm surge watch, is Vero Beach, and that's where our Mike Seidel is live, where it's already blustery, and it's at least going to stay that way for days.
It is, Dr. Nab. That's a concern. This is not an in and out system like a tropical storm or hurricane where you've got a tight core and it comes in and then it's out of there. Now, Ian was an exception. But with this said, we've got a large gradient of pressure high to the north and the storm coming our way, so that's going to tighten up and the winds will continue to increase. They're already steady at about 20 miles an hour. You can see my shirt blowing here in the wind, which doesn't take much with this shirt, but still gives you an idea visually of what's going on. Not a lot of gust in the wind at this point. That'll occur more potentially if this system tightens up more, but generally it's just going to be the sustained wind slowly ramping up as we head into Wednesday night. Sustained winds 40, 50, maybe 60 miles an hour with higher gusts. And that will continue to push the water on shore and higher up. Successive high tides. We often talk about this with nor'easters, slow-moving nor'easters, and this is kind of like a big nor'easter. The wind isn't just concentrated in one area, it's spread out all the way from South Florida into the Carolina coast. So this is impacting many people, unlike a hurricane or a typical hurricane or tropical storm. With that said, as Dr. Nab mentioned, we have the watches, hurricane watches and storm surge watches. Almost a guarantee that storm surge watch will be upgraded to a warning. We'll see what the National Hurricane Center does here at 10 p.m. Eastern. Now that we're on standard time, the advisories come in at 4 and 10 a.m. and p.m. It's unusual to have any kind of tropical system when we're on standard time. That's why it seems unusual to have an advisory at 4 and 10. So we'll get that in the next couple of hours. In the meantime, we're going to be watching the surf. It's very, very frothy. Rip current's a big issue right on through Wednesday and Thursday. Also, coastal flooding as the tide gets higher and higher. Tide is now going out. Our next high tide will be about 7:30 tomorrow morning. By the way, we're going to be back here live starting at 7 a.m. Eastern, and we'll be here in the morning, and in the evening we'll have Jen Carfagno on, and also Reynolds Wolf up the coast. This is going to be impacting, as I mentioned, areas all the way up the coast. The rain probably, Chris, will not have much of an impact here until we get into Wednesday. In fact, tomorrow we may get through tomorrow rain-free. And the amounts right now we're expecting 2 or 3 inches, maybe some isolated higher spots, but the entire state of Florida is not in a drought. It's primarily on the panhandle. The peninsula is not in any kind of drought, not even an abnormally dry on the drought monitor, which is D0. So it's not that they don't need the rain, but they're not hurting like most of the rest of us are in the lower 48.
All right, meteorologist Mike Seidel, appreciate that.
And one of the places that is in the hurricane watch, the storm surge watch, the cone, everything, is Vero Beach. And our Mike Seidel is there. And Mike, as we've been talking about, yeah, the details of the track and intensity relative to Florida Peninsula landfall will determine who gets maybe hurricane force winds and the worst storm surge. But there's no getting away from this nasty onshore flow and beach erosion.
No, and I want to talk to you a minute about what you mentioned earlier, because it's what I noticed on the cameras today and even yesterday. If you look at the beach cam, Dr. Nab, in West Palm Beach or Vero Beach, I checked them out up by the Cape, Daytona, and up to Jacksonville. You put all these pictures together and they all look the same. Now, that's not typically the case, right? When you have a typical tropical storm or hurricane, you go 100 miles away, 3 days out, and you don't have the kind of surf we've seen 150 miles north of here.
Yeah, and that's because it's about more than Nicole. That high pressure coming off the east coast of the U.S. that's going to be steering it toward the Florida Peninsula is also going to be providing that pressure gradient from the Chesapeake down to Florida, Mike. So it's a tremendous onshore push over hundreds of miles of coastline and several states.
Yeah, the old PGF in meteorology, pressure gradient force.
That's right.
Thanks, Dr. Knapp. Yeah, we're going to watch that because we're going to be out here for the next several days. With this situation, and we're not really dealing with a true eye wall, it seems to me that we can sit right here. We don't have to worry about jogging north or south 20, 30, 40 miles to get into the worst of the weather. With that said, I think we're going to be fine just sitting here. Now, we've got a safe place. We've got elevation in case that surge gets a little bit out of hand. But look at that surf tonight. And we're going to be back here first light in the morning at 7 a.m. Eastern. We've got Jen Carfagno, Daytona Beach.